At the outset, let me thank Dr. Srinivas. Wonderful organization, teamwork, and I think well begun is half done. My topic is my favorite topic. A lot of you may have heard me speak on this at multiple occasions. I never lose a chance to speak on this topic. Is just to highlight how our understanding of OSA has evolved over the last couple of decades, I would say. So the typical construct that we speak about in OSA is when the patient falls asleep, the muscle relaxes, there is hypoventilation, reduced muscle activity causes the airway to collapse, causes the apnea or the hypopnea to happen, and the breathing effort to go up, causes an arousal, and the patient again kind of like goes into falling asleep. So that's your chain, that's a standard model that we have. And what do? Is our therapeutic targets are decided by our knowledge of this pathophysiology. So we act on the upper airway narrowing or the collapse. And we have identified various phenotypes in the first, I would say 20, 25 years, 30 years of our understanding with sleep apnea. We get guys with nasal congestion. We get guys with, more so in the pediatric, with adenotonsillar hypertrophy, but adults with tonsillar hypertrophy, we know that they do very well with surgery. And then we get the obese kind of a patient who is typically a very good candidate for PAP therapy. However, when we talk about tackling the upper airway narrowing, what are we actually addressing? We are addressing the critical closing pressure, the P crit, and the narrower the airway gets, the more collapsible it is. And what are we addressing? We are either addressing the static anatomy or the dynamic anatomy by blowing it up with a PAP therapy. All that we are addressing is the airway diameter. Now, looking at this approach, what has been our experience with the various treatment options? We have the positive airway pressure therapy, we have the surgical options, we have the oral appliances. Now, we find poor compliance with this PAP therapy and limited applications of the mandibular advancement devices. And with surgery, as surgeons, we get variable outcome. So the question is, if we know the pathophysiology so well and we are trying to address it, are we missing something when we are getting outcomes which are still leave a scope for improvement? So the question comes is, are we identifying the disease condition well? So phenotype is any observable characteristic or a disease where the morphology or the development or any property without any implication of a mechanism, whereas endotype is a subtype of the same condition in which there is a distinct pathophysiology mechanism at play. So question comes, are there different endotypes which are responsible for the variable outcomes? Now when you go back to the upper airway physiology right from our MBBS days, we know that it's a complex structure. We have been so far addressing the mechanical properties of the airway. However, there are other factors such as the arousal threshold and the respiratory control, and also the drive to the upper airway muscles which decide the dynamicity or the shape of the airway. So what are the other factors that we talked about? We talked about the anatomical factors, but in up to 2/3 of patients with sleep apnea, we'll have the non-anatomical factors such as the arousal threshold, loop gain, and the muscle responsiveness, which is essentially playing a role in making them obstruct in the night. So the upper airway is more than just a floppy tube which you can blow up. So the non-anatomical factors that we see, most importantly in the Starling resistor concept also, we see the dynamic obstruction that is happening at the level of the genioglossus muscles. What we know is that OSA patients tend to have a higher resting tone of these muscles when they are awake, so to say compensate for a narrow airway. However, they lose this compensatory effect once they go off to sleep, and this leads to a collapse in the airway. Drugs such as desipramine, which can stimulate the muscle, have known to improve on this and improve the obstruction. Even something as simple as myofunctional therapy has shown, done consistently, up to 50% improvement in AHI, improvement in the Epworth sleepiness scores, improvement in the LSATs and reduced snoring. So just by doing exercises, you are improving. Even the new kid on the block, so to say, yet to be launched in India, the hypoglossal nerve stimulation also works on a similar principle. However, if you notice here, they have been very careful in their patient selection. So again, they are identifying the endotype. They are not doing. So the average patient in which their BMI was 28.4 and AHI being 29.3. So one should go away from a one size fit all kind of an approach and understand the endotype of the patient and prescribe the right therapy to that patient. Then the drugs which are being tested, and again this is cutting edge research, this is not, I would say, full-fledged clinical practice, but a combination of these drugs have shown to improve the upper airway collapsibility. So again, identifying the endotype and treating the endotype. Now typically coming to arousal. Now when we talk about arousal thresholds, the classical OSA patient is the concurrent patient who has got a very high arousal threshold, difficult to wake up. However, up to 30% patients have a very low arousal threshold. They are light sleepers, so to say. So what happens is when they fall asleep, they get sleep discontinuity, and if you can see, their low arousal threshold leads to repeated interruptions in their sleep, and they have all the symptoms that you will expect from a person who's got full sleep apnea. And again, how do you measure it? You can measure it by measuring the mean negative epiglottic pressure, which is occurring just prior to an arousal. And how do you look in terms of the study parlance? So to answer Shashi's question, if I see a patient where the saturations are not dropping that much, hypopneas outnumber apneas significantly, and the overall severity of the disease is not much, AHI is less than 30 per hour, then there is role of giving them specific sedatives which can improve their lower arousal threshold, which can make their sleep stable so that the minor interruptions don't cause them apneas or hypopneas. The third factor that we look into play is the ventilatory loop gain. Loop gain sounds complicated. For people who have tried to read the literature, it's very simple. It's a degree of response to the disturbance in breathing. So it's an engineering phenomena. Our body has an inherent autocorrect mechanism. However, some of the patients have a very unstable response. So if there is a very high response to a central or a ventilatory disturbance, the patient is more likely to have OSA. And how do you treat these patients? By stabilizing this response by supplemental oxygen and acetazolamide. What if you combine these two therapies? So if you combine patients with high loop gain and a low arousal threshold, you give oxygen with a sedative, you can get overall AHI reduction by 47%, with 45% being responders as per the Scher's criteria. So the point being that there is more to sleep apnea treatment than just CPAP or surgery. So to give this concept a holistic view, think about your airway to exist from 100 to 0, 100 being a wide open airway and 0 being a completely obstructed airway like that you see in a patient who comes in stridor. An open airway will typically never develop OSA. A blocked airway will always develop OSA. However, most of our patients will be in this spectrum of vulnerable anatomy, and it will be these things, the non-anatomical factors, which decide whether the patient ends up having OSA or not. So we need to have an exposure, an effect modifier to influence the outcome. You look at where the patient is. If the patient is in a crowded anatomy zone, then you have to think about an anatomical intervention, be it surgery, skeletal, soft tissue, be it CPAP. However, if the patient has a wide open airway, then surgeries, anatomical interventions may not help that much. You need to add a lot of non-anatomical interventions to improve that. So just to divide, simplify, this is a palm scale given by Dr. Denny Eckert. He was there with us in the previous conference. If you get a person with a very collapsible airway which is collapsing at +2 centimeters, you have to think about anatomical interventions which are major, like a CPAP or a skeletal surgery. If you get an airway which is moderately collapsible, and this is majority of your patients, you use a combination therapy along with the anatomical interventions. However, a significant portion of patients will be getting better only with non-anatomical interventions. To see where the patient lies, don't just focus on improving the anatomy alone. You have more treatment targets in terms of increasing the arousal threshold and improving the muscle tone. And these are the reasons why we are incorporating myofunctional therapy as a standard go-to approach for most of our patients, along with the other anatomical interventions. How do I apply this knowledge? So this is a chart, this is an old study where the concept can be applied that if you take the Friedman staging system and if you operate patients with a favorable anatomy, you get a good outcome. Almost 80% patients respond. If the anatomy drops down a little bit, becomes equivocal, your success rate drops down to almost half. And if you are offering a patient with a poor anatomy, your success rate is abysmally low. So when we are doing surgery, we are not taking only AHI into consideration. We should take the anatomy and the anatomical phenotype into consideration. And one should not just rely upon the quality of life or ESS, but the anatomy. So question being, or the point being, just don't, because somebody's got a high AHI does not mean he's a poor surgical candidate. And just because somebody's got a low AHI does not mean that he's a bad surgical candidate. So take home message is knowledge of various endotypes is important. Treatment for OSA should be tailor-made. Anatomical factors for the collapsible nature of the airway and non-anatomical factors for the you should treat with combination therapy. And again, it should not be that if the only tool that I have is a hammer. If I'm a surgeon, I'm going to operate all. If I'm a pulmonologist, it will be CPAP to all. And if I'm a dentist, it will be mandibular advancement for all. It has to be custom made for our patients. Thank you so much.